I'm so glad this worked out. Your questions were all wonderful. So who'd like to begin? They were all such great questions. Carol, do you remember your question?
No, I don't. I sent it the minute I saw the email, and I don't remember what I asked you.
Well, they were all good questions. So I just decided that everyone can just raise their hand and ask. Delana.
Okay, so I emailed you a few things. The first one was asking your opinion of what John Lutzkovich talked about, how nines and will mistype as fours and fives. And John did write those quite detailed articles on what he thinks is going on. So I sent that to you. So what I was asking was, what did you think of John's opinion? Boring three.
Let's take about it.
Okay.
One of the most important things I learned was the preponderance of nines, then sixes, then threes. And first I thought it was just typology, culture. But then when I was doing my research, I went to all walks of life, people that would never want to do anything with typology, but I kind of talked them into giving their perspectives. And so it was universal. And with one study years ago, was on what relationships work the best together. Most of the people were in relationship with a nine. And I thought, well, that's because nines are easygoing or trying to get along. But then it was just everything I did. There was such a large number of nines, and I was evaluating many cultures, not just Enneagram or typology. And then when I met Naranjo in 1996, I said, is it just me, or they're like mostly nines, then sixes, and then threes? And he said, oh, yes, they're the primary types. And I go, yeah, that's what I thought. But I said, it's like they mistype, but they're so common. But the nine will at least be willing to have the nine in the tritype, but the six often does not want it. And when they took my earlier test, they would try to work with the test to not be a six. So originally I had those cards. I don't know if any of you saw my first cards that were online, and I would do them like a Las Vegas dealer. I'd put them out and then they would choose one and I'd pick it up and put it away. And I did the type and tri-type. And if I was at an event like of 60 people, someone else that I was co-teaching with, and that was often David, would have a set of cards and another person a set, and to get through that number of people. But I went around and checked everyone. And there's a particular way that people will choose cards as a six, and I see the pattern. And so when I see it, I ask them a few questions, and I tell the people, well, this is like a particular process that the six uses when making their selections. And then I asked people that had six the questions that were needed, like why, not what you do. And that's why I always say it when we're together. I always say, but why? So you do this or you don't do this, but why? Which is far more indicative of type than what we do, because that's behavior. So we have to go a step beyond to what's underneath it. And they would always answer like the six. And I would say, well, you're the hard to identify six because you are disidentified with the structure in six. And the reason for that is so many of the archetypes of type six were lost in the dissemination of the Enneagram. They were just literally lost between trainings and early teachers. So the early authors didn't get all the archetypes of the six or the nine. So for example, the intellectual nine, like Ichazo, was totally left out of the dissemination of the Enneagram. Other people, they're trying to make sense of, gosh, this person's like a nine, but they're really intellectual. But they have the defense of not knowing and not wanting to make a decision if they have to be separate from someone they don't want to be separate from. So it's just all pretty much unconscious. So he said, no, there are more nines than anything else. And I said, well, what percentage? And he said, he asked me what I found, but that he had found that at least 75% were nines, because you need more nines. In other words, people to go along to get along for a culture to work. And the rarest type was the 8, and then the 4, and then the 7. So primary types, the 963, in that order, not 936. So the 9's the most common, the 6 is the most dutiful, and then the 3 is the initiator. So in terms of percentages, they make up the top 20%, 20 to 30%. It would vary with the groups I was in. And then in terms of tritype, they almost always had 6 or 9 in their tritype. And people that John was referring to that are 9s that type as 4s or 5s if they're intellectual, in my experience, were the 945, the 946, or the 947, with the most common type in typology being the 964, not the 954. But when I would run the surveys asking people their type to see that who is this person interested in typologies in the Enneagram, and what would always come out in all 24 studies is the 954. But when I looked at their answers, the adjectives they used and what they checked off and stacked in what order, they were actually 6s. But what I'm saying is they don't know that because they didn't get that chunk of information on the archetypes. So I agree with John that there are more 9s and 6s than the other types, and it's in a total stacking order of dominance. And then each one of us gets to all 9 types, but how quickly? It's just a matter of, do we get there immediately because we're a 369 and our wings mean that all 9 types are copied or included, so we get all the types right up front? Or is it indirectly through a series of tritype archetypes? And I think I should say this now too, is that we have one dominant tritype, but we also have 2 to 6 tritypes that we use every day, all day. But just like our dominant Enneagram type, we have a dominant tritype. And the people that have more tritypes will have 9 or 6 in them, because that means they immediately are connected to 2 wings off their own type. And we all have that. But the hexad types are always connected to one primary type. And it could be indirectly, or like in my case, as triple hexad, I'm not connected to a primary. I have to get there via a wing of a wing or a line of connection from one of the types. So that's why the 478 is the rarest and the 369 is the most common. And then all the variable combinations show you the prominence. But like, for example, Trevor, how long did it take for you to find that you were a 541? Because that's triple hexad.
I still have my doubts sometimes. I think I'm more emotional than a lot of 5s. So time will tell when we get to the next chapter here.
And it is hard
I thought 9 and 3 were in there before. I don't think so much now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because the INTJ can have a 1-ish quality, and the 4 has a line to 1, and the 1-5 is the control axis, the hexad axis. And a lot of people don't realize that there are these lines of connection for the hexad. That's the 2-7, the 4-8, and the 1-5. So everything is connected to everything else one way or another. But thank you. That'll be good.
I compare a lot to my partner to kind of get a feel. Not sure about a tri-type, but 9 and 7 are in there. And I have a lot more access to anger, but I have a different kind of trouble because I want my anger expressed to be useful. And I really have a trouble if I'm just raging and I can't do anything with it.
Yeah, that's kind of difficult for everybody, but would you say it builds up and then you explode, or can you be a little frustrated all the time?
It can hit pretty hard sometimes. I don't worry about milder levels of anger. They just kind of show up and I deal with them.
Yeah. Yeah. The frustration occurs with the 1-4-5 tritype because it's very persnickety regardless of the order of the types. And of course, leading with one, there'd be more frustration, but all three of them are frustration oriented when they combine. Because remember, people keep making me aware that it's not clear why people are mistyping and mistrityping, but it's because they're not measuring the merge. And without the merged new focus, you're just typing like 3 types. And that's not what tritype is. I'm not saying that couldn't exist in another way, but to have your tritype, you must combine the 3 core fears, the 3 idealized self-images, and the 3 defense strategies of the types in the tritype. And when those merge, some qualities are amplified and others are minimized. So sometimes people will say, but I don't do that. Well, they could have a tritype that minimizes an aspect of a type that they are, but they don't see it. So I can't stress enough that you need to, yes, kind of begin with the types you identify with, but not decide based on behaviors or identifications. You must see it. And you must observe the defense strategy as determined by Naranjo, not just, yeah, I don't like this or my defensiveness here, but it's literally his terms that I agreed with and people have. Elena?
Just quickly, what I really like with the way you teach, Catherine, is that with regards to instincts, you talk about the defense strategies and the needs that, each. I don't really like to talk about the instinctual stack right now. I'm just talking about the lead. So in terms of the defense strategies and the way we get there to fulfill our instinctual needs, that can all look very 6-ish, like when these instinctual needs are triggered. So do you think there is, like, some people may think they have this 6-ish energy because, and I'm not talking about SB resources or anything like that. I'm just saying how our nervous system gets triggered when we don't get what we want instinctually. That's hard to kind of really peel back. Do you think there is an overlap in terms of the 6-ish quality when it comes to our triggers coming from the instinctual space?
Well, it can, but I do have to say that the self-pres is the defense of the defenses. And if we go back to Ichazo's triads, and he called them instinctual triads, which is why Naranjo called his edition the instinctual subtypes. But in those original triads of conservation, which would be the gut types, relation, which would be the heart types, and adaptation would be the head types. So the gut types and self-pres are the same, but different expressions of the same 891. And then 2, 3, 4, it's the heart, and it's also sexual. But each time that Naranjo added the subtypes, it's the more primitive form. So our heart type is a higher function, the center itself, than the instinctual need that you must have your someone to feel safe. And it's got to be a very special someone, and not a lot of someones, and not as a resource, but as a person that will actually look out for you and you look out for them with the mutual reciprocity. But not like social where it's friendliness. It's just knowing beyond a shadow of a doubt that that person will have your back because you're so, in a way, irresistible, or the attachment is really strong, but it's desirability. And that could be any number of things. And then the social is the lower functioning of the head center. And that's why our social subtypes are thinking through things. And they're using language that sounds like the head center. Well, social is just the primitive version of who's who, and what do I need to know or learn to be safe? And that's the head center. If you see anywhere that it's written practical knowledge, that's because they're trying to figure out what they need to know. And then they're going to go get it somehow or figure it out. I think I gave you guys the example, like if you went fishing, or let's say there's no food and the 5 figures out that the fish are around at a certain time, and by the reflection of the scales, they can figure out the best place to put their hook or what have you. They've studied it in depth, and they just keep testing, trial, which is why they're so good at documenting processes. And then the 7 just says, hey, Mr. 5, why don't we go fishing together? And they use their charm to persuade the person in the know to learn what they need to learn, but it's still the same defense. I must find out what I don't know, and I must learn it. And then the 6, being the center of the head center, is like, wait, do I need to go study deeply to learn what the 5 learns? Or do I need to be charming to get people to teach me or help me? Oh, wait, can I maybe ask the 5 if they'll teach me? And it's being split and looking at all the options, like all head types, but then the fear is that you're not going to find the right one that will ensure that you're safe. So in a way, if you know that the self-pres is the primitive version of conservation, then if there was a earthquake right now, we would kind of be bracing our body. But I've even had earthquakes where I just keep teaching, but because I think it's just going to pass. But if things started falling, we're all in self-pres in that moment. And this is where actually what we grew up with can be influential. So people who had trauma in childhood and felt a threat to their survival will be more reactive, but it doesn't mean they became self-pres, because research suggests that we are born with these, but our identification with our 3 types and our 3 instincts are a different story. So we could be positively, negatively, or neutrally identified. But back to what you were saying, Elena, is that the most important thing many people do not realize is that the core fear of the Enneagram type, when merged with the core fear of the instinct, creates the new focus. Just like the core fears of the 3 types create the tritype. And it's also the idealized images and the defenses. So it's the same concept all the way through. It doesn't vary, but it can produce very different outcome. So I have found that if someone is a head type and they choose the 6 card, but let's say they chose both 5 cards and put them at the top of my test. Have you all taken the test? No? Well, if you go back and look at your test, see what you chose analogous types. And if you had like 2 head types at the top, and then let's say the 7s, and then you had 2 6s. I even had someone who had 2 5s, so that's 6 head type cards. They're usually a head type. We just have to figure out which one. Often the 6, because that's the middle, but the 7 has a wing of 6 and a line to 5. So there are situations that reverse that, where the 5 has a wing of 6 and a line to 7. So the head type is extremely difficult at finding their type. And if they're counterphobic, not just counterphobic 6, but the counterphobic 7 or the counterphobic 5, they're going to show their agitation more and be more assertive as 5s go or 7s go. And that can slip through, but they'll still be notified about the amount of 6 in their tritype. But what I have found is they've often experienced trauma as a child. So a 7 who's had trauma might choose the 6 cards, but all 6s have wings of both 5 and 7, because to be our type is the tension between the wing before us and the wing after our type. Okay? Yeah, Trevor?
I'd never heard that before about counterphobic presentation in different types. Could you say more about that?
Yeah, it happens with the head types because we're talking about phobia.
Got it.
So, for example, when Naranjo asked me to show him my research, I just gave him my book and my research paper, and he had not considered countertypes for all the types. And he asked if I'd co-teach with him and add my research findings. I was more than willing to do that. In fact, I love sharing what I learned. And he said, well, you know, Katherine, everybody asks me if there's a counterphobic 3, a counterphobic 9, or whatever. And I go, no, 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 not counterphobic, just countertype. They appear based on the merge between the instinct and the type. Those two fears make it not appear like they could be that type. So, for example, even doing this in the gut center, the sexual wants union fusion, and the 8 wants the autonomy. Well, how do you have union fusion and autonomy? Well, the primary, more primitive drive is the instinct. So I would be in search of twinship, that kind of affinity that transcends practicality, in favor of anything else. But because I'm still an 8, I will surrender. That's why it's called possession surrender. I must have the total devotion of the person that I surrender to. But then, because I'm a gut type, I snatch it back. And then I'm autonomous again. And then I surrender. And then I'm autonomous. So I surrender to loved ones. But I can't live like that every day, all day, because the 8 is saying autonomy, autonomy, autonomy. You have to do it your own way and go your own way. Does that make sense? So with the head types, because fear and paranoia are part of the head center, and the primitive version, the social type. So if someone's a social, they might also get 6 cards, because if you remember the pictures of the social cards, in one, they're people, doing teamwork or pulling against each other. And then I use words that could indicate being separate from. And so if they chose self-pres and social in that order, and they had 6 cards, even if they're a 7 or 5, they're going to get the messages, because the intention of the notices was to just have people go deeper, that their combination is very specific for people who mistype, and most commonly the 6 and 9. Why? Because they're hardwired to track behaviors. They are meant to do that. So you track behaviors and then you adjust to the situation at hand. But the head types adjust by assessment. And if there's negative possibilities, even the 7 will get paranoid and then just go to greener pastures, or they might become very rebellious and challenge. Does that give some insight, Trevor?
Yeah, I think it does actually. I had a phase of my life where, as in my late teens, and I concluded that staying in my comfort zone, I wasn't going to get anything I wanted at all. And although I didn't look forward to it, I had a strategy of kind of forcing myself to do a lot of things that I disliked, to be fitter, to be more social, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I wonder if that's part of it.
Could be. And the other thing, you have sexual second, which brings up competition, because we compete for our mate. And I don't know, you're stacking how close they are, but when they're close, they almost work in tandem with each other. And so it makes a 5 more interested in attracting and in having a closer relationship. Now, if the 5 has 4, there's more arrogance, more confidence in what you know, in the intellect. And if it's 1, then there's more certainty about truth. If it happens to be 5, 4, 8, then there's more proclamations or declarations of their sense of truth. But the interesting thing to note is they don't just make it up. 5s have already researched it before they proclaim something. Do you relate to that?
Very much. That's why I get upset when people don't call me open-minded.
Yeah, because you.
I've worked through the questions.
Yeah. 8s feel that way too, but 5 and 8 have a shared line, and it's the 8's already gone through all the variables ourselves, and we think of things throughout our life, and maybe we haven't looked at the most recent research, although the intellectual 8 does. Now, who's the intellectual 8? The 8 with 4 and 7. Because the 4 identifies with being intellectual, trying to make sense of their suffering and what it means. And if the 8 has 5, they're intellectual as well, but they might be a little quieter about it. But the 7's very intellectual. So any of those combinations makes an intellectual 8. The other 8s are not intellectual, and they're more the original archetype that Naranjo saw. And then I found out that I said, well, Claudia, how many 8s have you worked with that actually have done the work? And I go, like, how many people in Arica were 8s? And he goes, 1. And I figured out there was a strong possibility that person was an 863, which makes the 6 automatically counterphobic. Whenever 6 is in a tritype, if there's an 8, it's always counterphobic. If there's a 1, it's usually counterphobic. It just depends on the third type. But then I talked to the person who dated that 8. I described the 863, and she goes, yeah, in fact, that's how we came up with the definition of an 8. And I go, aha, because anytime a 638, a 368, or an 836 reads the description of that tritype, they think they're an 8. And you can't talk them out of it. It isn't until they see the way they react to fear that they understand 6s, because it's the fiercest type, more than 3, 7, 8. Elena?
I'll stop hijacking. Sorry, last question. So we were talking about in a group chat about well, I was bringing it up in terms of capitalism, and like because I've come looking at this from different cultural aspects, the familial aspects, and all the rest of that. So can you tell quickly what's a 3-ish 7 versus a 7-ish 3? Because
Yeah.
sorry, it's cultural. It's cultural in this first world capitalism. Like this is how you sell yourself. Not necessarily so much in Australia, but yes, I think in America, much more.
Yeah,
So
in America
yeah,
and China, culturally, if the country leads with 3, those are the values of the culture that you must achieve. It's usually social 3. You must have status, a position, and everything is a fight for having value and socially recognized value. But if it's like self-pres 3, then what is valued is what you accumulate, not necessarily how great you look, but you need to be known as someone that's competent and capable. But they won't be as inclined to say, yeah, when I met this famous person, I kind of thought this, like the name dropping without actually saying, I know the person. Yeah, when I met that person, I felt this way. They're not going to do that as much. They're going to present a little more humble and say it doesn't matter to them. But it does on an unconscious level, because they're still striving to have whatever they perceive is of value in their life. And it's more that they discover that they don't want to be not valued. So the self-pres 3 can go one of 2 ways. It can be a little more humble, but saying it, I'm thinking of this friend that was in a study group with those of us that all were using the Enneagram types for many years, starting in 1995. And he would always say, "Oh, you guys are all professionals, you're all coaches and therapists and teachers." Yeah, and I'm just a veterinarian. I mean, that's quite an accomplishment. But he would say, "Yeah, I built my house myself," but it was like a beautiful house in Los Altos, California, which is gorgeous in a prime location. But it was the best wood, best location. All the physical things were highly valued. But he cut the cost by doing a lot himself. But he was unconsciously telling us how much it was important to him to be valued. Now, he was also an ESTJ, so you can just imagine how he could be very competent building a house. Another self-pres 3 might not be an ESTJ, but they might be, intellectually, like if they were an ENTJ, it might show up in another area. But if it's the other way around, and wait, let me make sure. Are you asking me a 3 and a 3 culture or a 3 and a 7 culture?
I'm just saying, in general, in a capitalist world, how could you say in America, how could you tell what's a 3-ish 7 versus a 7-ish 3?
Oh, good question. The 3-ish 7, by the way, it's an uber positive person. But if 3 is in the lead, they are too positive for the 7 because they have the phrases like up on the wall, ambition or motivation or whatever or they'll have calendars that remind them of what their mantra could be to be a success. So the 7 with 3, the other way around, they look like a professional and people think they're a 3, but they don't want to be narrowed down to goals. They're more spontaneous. Whereas the 3 with 7 is less spontaneous if you see them side by side. But the 3 in the lead is gung-ho, and they use their 7 ability to persuade. And the positivity is like over the top. They cannot let in negative because the 7, feels down or like discouraged. They don't want to feel discouraged, so they look for something positive. And the 3 has to achieve and be seen that way, so they're going to do something else so they can get that good feeling, that hit of good feeling by achieving and accomplishing. But they have to be popular and liked as well. Wow, what a burden. But and as we know, some of you understand that. So it is important just switching the types and the tritype and the ranking of the instincts and the identifications.
So since we're discussing that 3-ish overlay of people in America, I feel like some people think I have a 3 wing because I live in America, but I feel like when I talk about the details of the way I pursue ambition, it's more like 8 like. So could you describe someone that doesn't even have 3 in American culture that might have 8 or 7 that might make them more ambitious?
Here's the thing I think is important first is the 4-5 is like allergic to 3. There's like a disdain for even their own 3-ness because they don't realize to be a 4, you have the tension of the 3, how you should produce, and the 5 wanting to be iconoclastic and do their own thing. And so the first thing is not cooperating on a social level in the way of whatever the culture's behaviors are that are required. The 4 is going to always be a little off from that, no matter what country they're in. But if you add in the 4-6-8, there's that engine of anxiety that propels the 4 forward. It isn't the 4 itself. It's the 6 getting agitated at the same time the 8 is pushing for resolution. And remember the 4-6-8, it numerically adds up and then reduced to a single digit to 9, which means that your tritype wants instant resolution or you're out of there. And, there are 9 tritypes in each triad. And then the number they become is very significant and reveals important qualities about the type. So that's what's so fascinating. You're in the 5-6-7 triad because it's against, The 458 is over there, if you've seen the Tristar. But within the 567, you're the type wanting resolution, resolution, resolution. The problem is you don't have the patience to get there slowly. You want it immediate. And it's not that you mean to be that reactive. It's just destabilizing if you have to stay in that state too long. Does that match you?
Yeah, I think it actually makes sense because I think that the biggest difference for everybody else who might think I have a 3 wing is that in social situations, I feel like because I go to clubs a lot, especially in deeper connections, I run into lots of problems to the point that I got banned because I get like actively aggressive about it. When people talk
Yes.
about healing, or people talk about and they relate to self-improvement, and I'm like, as in someone told me, so that you don't trauma up on people you barely know, and my body impulse is to do it even more out of spite, as
That's
in
right.
or walk away. Whereas, it, yeah, so with three, I feel like threes don't like when they see this is a social norm, this is the rule, you have to follow it. Like, I either go against it or I just go quiet and disappear, kind of go more.
Yeah, you're either, you need it instantly. If it's not there, you're gonna assert for it. And then if it doesn't happen, you're out of there. But you'll
Yeah,
have a parting comment usually if you tried to explain something that concerned you and they didn't respond. And even if you don't say, but didn't you see that? Or you're being an idiot, or whatever the word is for each individual, for 6-8, it's an alarm. And if people don't respond, then you got to get out of there. And because you don't feel comfortable, it's not enjoyable, you don't feel safe. You just think of it on a primal level. Either try to make it safe and make sure everyone understands, especially if you felt hurt, then you don't feel safe anymore if someone hurt you and they don't want to understand how they hurt you. So that's the different, that then speaks to the sexual social. So of the group, you choose the person or persons that you find desirable and you try to become desirable to them. And if they let you down, then this is what my mom would do. You know, it's kind of an energetic, you're not important then. If I'm not important, neither are you. Okay.
yeah, exactly. I would say that's a huge differentiator because it's always I keep going on this because I feel like people don't understand that three assertiveness has this overly toxic positivity of like, and
Yeah.
also reluctance to show too much negative feelings, even if they do feel
Yeah.
anger, anxiety, they don't want to show that.
Yeah. Whereas the 8 just says what's true for them.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. And the 4 is actually the most vociferous about that because the emotions bubble really fast, where when the 8 is upset, they get colder and stonier and say, so you're telling me. So instead of getting hot-headed, you'd have to be in an 8 space for them to become hot-headed. But the 6 becomes the most a hothead, and the 4 becomes so emotionally angry that they're very articulate when they're angry. Or if they're an introvert, they might just, shut up and show their disdain in their energy. But that's how you have power. We each want power. We all have it one way or another.
yeah,
Thank you. But yeah, they'll try to make you 3-wing, but you always have both wings. To be your type, it's the tension between the 2 wings. But what gives you that engine is your 8.
yeah,
Okay?
yeah. Thank you so much. I don't know
Yeah.
if there's another
Sure.
follow-up thing I wanted to ask, just because other people, there are 3 people in line, just because I'm trying to think about how to phrase this, like that 3 wingers kind of like something that happens a lot to me is that when people talk about goals and have to go through bureaucracy, like in order to have emotional regulation. And I think about what's the purpose, so that socially other people will be more happy around you. And I get angry automatically. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna work alone. I'm gonna work as an independent contractor, so I don't have to deal with people. Anytime I'm thinking about work and why I'm so stressed, because I'm always thinking, how can I avoid people? How can I avoid people? How can I avoid people so that I don't hurt them? Because
Yeah.
I'm not gonna get involved if I'm supposed to repress all of that because I know it's gonna happen. So I might as well just avoid people, or avoid Even if I socialize, I'm like, sure, cool, awesome. Like I'm not. People think I'm AI generated sometimes. I think I said in one story that you sound AI generated, and I was like, maybe I do, but it's
Yeah.
like kind of emotionally, I'm not here because if I am, it's not gonna go well.
Well,
So
because the 8 in the tri-type is getting stonier and more indifferent, and we all shut down our empathy when we're angry. Every single one of us. We'd never be able to overcome an obstacle if we stayed totally open emotionally. So we shut down our empathy to take the action to protect ourselves, or if we feel like something's being stolen from us or we're in danger in some way. And it's all unconscious. But the thing is that the the fours that try to act as if and identify with the 3 wing actually have 9 or 6 in their tri-type. So it amplifies the 3-ness and it amplifies that 3, 6, 9, trying to comply, trying to fit in. But because we thought there was only one wing, most people have perpetuated that and they think it's wing based, but it's actually tri-type based. But we do identify with one wing more the other, but usually the introvert identifies with their introverted wing and the extrovert identifies with their extroverted wing. Okay?
yeah, thank you so much. No, that
Yeah.
makes sense. It's 8 actually. Because I didn't know it was 5 or 8, but I think it's both. So that makes sense.
Yeah, you put them together and yeah.
Yeah,
And they go to emotional indifference really fast.
that's yeah, that's basically what happens to me all the time. And I'm like, it's not personal, bro. I literally get this
Yeah.
thing going and then leave. You're fine. We
Yeah.
kind of, yeah,
We're all a mess. It's just what kind of mess are we?
yeah,
Okay,
yeah. I don't
Nicole.
know. Please come across more charming. Anyways, good
Okay,
stuff.
yeah. You have to have a lot of charm.
Okay, so I was watching your video. It's like 5 hours long on all the tri-types. I like you compiled it all together, and then you had about
Yeah.
an hour at the beginning where you were explaining some. I think it was stuff about Tristar or something like that. But there
Yeah.
was this diagram, and there was like all these little pieces everywhere, and then it had the tri-types, and then you related your own tri-type to. It said 1 above it, and
That's
so
numerically. Like if you add 4, 7, and 8, it's actually 19, 10, 1. So it becomes 19. And then if you add the 1 and 9, it becomes 10. But it's
okay,
still
so
double digits. So you add the 1 and 0, and it becomes 1.
okay, so it is. It's like you. So I saw other numbers above other tri-types, like 853. I think it was 7.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how does that work?
Same thing. How does it influence your tri-type?
Yeah, like how is the yeah, exactly.
It means that there's, like, if anyone has 1, they're starters, no matter where they are on the TriStar. Now, if they happen to also be in the 3 sector of the 2, 3, 4, then they're really gonna start something and make it happen because that's important to them. But if they're a 1 up at the top in the, the gut center, like the 9, they're seeking resolution. So they're a starter that wants to resolve. So they're going to go through steps to help resolve things. It won't be so instant as like the 4, 6, 8 that is in the opposing triad. So let's look at it that way. The 2, 3, 4 is the initiating triad. The 5, 6, 7 is the opposing, always seeing the opposite point of view in search for balance. And then the 8, 9, 1 is the integrating, trying to merge it. And I should say that most people don't realize that the 2, 3, 4 who suffer from shame and grief and kind of a love trauma have their suffering that way. And so they do something to be worthy and to have value. And then the 5, 6, and 7 have the fear and paranoia, and like they're going to be unsafe with others. So they focus on others. Are you the safe tribe or are you the dangerous tribe? And how can I tell? What can I observe to see if I'm safe? Who will hurt me? Who won't? And here's what was lost in transmission is that the gut type is the merging. of the heart and the head, and because it's the reconciling triad. And that's why gut types don't like making decisions, and that we focus on good, bad, right, wrong, nice, not nice, safe, unsafe. It's all polarities. But the one tries to research and find out to be certain to have an answer. And the 8 just is reactive and immediately has an answer and is more than willing to change it when there's a better answer. It's just a different approach. But they go into action. So our gut triad is what we need to do or not do to feel safe. And then the 9 says, well, should I research it more and see what other people think and get consensus? Or should I act immediately like the 8? And then the 9 says, well, maybe it'll just work itself out, and they're more allowing. So the high side of the 9 is that they accept. And when they struggle is when they wait too long and maybe should have taken action and didn't, but they're not really meant to take an action, to tell you the truth. So once you understand that if your tritype is up in the reconciling triad, no matter what your number is, no matter what your tritype is, you're seeking resolution first and foremost, that your tritype is meant to find resolution.
Okay, so all the so that number above it, is that like some kind of an overlay on the tritype?
That's the numerical addition of the 3 types in the tritype.
So then like for you, 874, it would be like the 1 is kind of an overlay on your.
Yeah, it's another quality underneath how I'm going to express my creativity.
Okay.
Now, the other thing with the Tristar, and I've done several versions of them so you can see different things, but there's only one set of 9. And in the set, the 478 is on the 4 point. So an 8 or a 7 with that tritype is highly creative because the 4 holds the point of individuality. And the 8 point is really the 458. And so a 5 with that tritype is still a reconciler, but they're going to assert. They're going to verbally assert. They're going to use their skills from 5 and 4 to get their point across. So it's almost better to see it to understand that. But there's so much wonderful information that was always there. Just when I tried to explain it years ago, they were just really beginning to understand the concept that there are 3 subtypes. And I go, yeah, but there's 3 types too, 3 types. That's why I called it 3 types originally. But every piece, and it goes on to infinity, is important, each piece. And it just shows more and more of our individuality. So the way I did the test is I opened it with 3 cards of the same Enneagram type, and you had to rank in first, second, and third position. So first choice, second choice, third choice. And I went through all 27. And then once you had your choices, then I started having the program serve you, okay, with the Hornavians, like, what do you choose? And with the harmonics, what do you choose? And then once you chose the top for each, they gave you the 3 and you had to rank those again. So it's all a ranking process. But having said that, 2 people could come out of 458, but have chosen different cards. But they were all 4 cards, 5 cards, and 8 cards because they had 3 to choose from. So you 3 times 7, that was 27 variables before you ever start this sorting process of our first tritypes, which were the primary and hexad tritypes. There's 3 right there. And then the 3 harmonics, which actually Ichazo and Naranjo called antipodes. And then with the center that matched it, which became known as harmonics. So it's the Hornavians and the harmonics, which is important because Naranjo put the Hornavians in the buckets of the types. And then he was basing the other choices on these antipodes of the opposite types. The hex had two hexad types that were similar, and then the center that was like that. So 4 and 8 are the two most intense types and reactive. And which type of the primary is reactive? The 6. So none of us knew that, of course. We just noticed, oh yeah, these are all 3 reactive. Or these are all 3 similar. But he did his job, is what I'm saying. Angela, go ahead.
For a sexual 7 with 4 like me, how is the 8 or 9 gut type going to affect that gestalt?
Huge difference. The type right next to us, we're never similar. We're opposite. So what happens when the 7 and 4 come together, there's an automatic need for uniqueness and individuality coming from
Right.
the 4 and creativity. And the 7 has creativity as well. And they like what's unusual and kind of trending and new and novel. So when those come together, you already have a very intellectual person that wants to talk about all these variables. And then when you add the 8, it's triple creative. And you're just going to go by your own opinion because it might be creative problem solving, but you're going to innovate. You're going to find a new way of doing something. And that's why Naranjo called the 8 the solution master, because we're never going to give in and give up. We're going to try another solution, another solution, another solution. But the 4 is finding, okay, okay, that's common. I need to change that part and bring in a new piece that's uncommon. Like 4s often share with me, they might have a favorite something, like a watch they inherited from their grandfather that was very unique. And then they see someone else with a modern version of that very same watch, and then they can't stand it to be their identifier anymore because it's like now it's common. I was with David at an airport once, and we had gotten this watch when we were in London, and we were shopping, and he just thought, yeah, this is me. Yeah, this is me. And then we were at the airport, and this guy that was built different and kind of had hairy arms, which is not a bad thing. It's just that not what David identified with. And then he never wore that watch again. And it's because it must mirror something about you. And not every type needs that, but the 4 does. So if you have the 9, you're more resistant in a hidden way. But the 4-7-9 is the most receptive, fairy-like, ethereal tritype of all. It's the 7 that's not going to be as assertive in the way they say things. They'll get around it and try to avoid it rather than just declaring it. I mean, that the 4-7-8 tries to get around things, but the 8 makes it so it's just being straightforward can seem like aggression, but it's not what the 8 means. They're just telling you what they think. So there's a huge difference in display. But they're both resistant because 9 and 8 are resistant. But how are you resistant? And what do you do with your resistance? And the 9 just doesn't budge, where that amplifies the 9-7 need for things to be positive. And the 8-4 needs to be emotional and significant and intense. There's an attraction to intensity. And the 8-7, well, it's got to be positive. Whereas the 7-9 is it's got to be easy. So less easy, more definite for the 4-7-8. 4-7-9 appears gentler. Not that they are, but appears that way.
Okay. Well, like, I feel like I'm very direct about things, but I don't know that I'm like the solution master, but
Yeah.
but
The
yeah.
4-7-8 leading with 8 never gives up on solutions. And even if it takes them
Right.
4 hours straight, they keep going. Whereas the 7 will divert, if you lead with 7, you'll divert to something more pleasant and come back to it.
Okay, thank you.
But 7 is going to assert, but they're going to prefer to have things more comfortable and easy, especially if the 9's in there. There's a need for ease. So that's
Okay.
you can just check out and observe. Like, how quickly do you react? Now, if you have the 4
Pretty
and,
quickly.
yeah, you have the 4 and 7, you're going, and what instinct you identify with?
Sexual.
Yeah. So but the sexual 7 is in love with love. So they kind of want things magical.
People would say that about me.
Whereas they're not as inclined to like the actual consummation. Not that they wouldn't like it, but it's more the excitement of discovery is the most attractive to the sexual 7. Because it's more mental, it's more imaginary.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know that. Yeah, I don't know that that really fits. People have said a couple of things because I've struggled with this for a long time. And they've said, well, see, I don't have a problem being vulnerable. And they're like, okay, so you don't have an 8 fix. But I don't know if that's exclusive. And also I have a hard time letting go emotionally. And they said that's a 9 fix. But I'm very direct and assertive, and
Well, it's also sexual 4.
Yeah.
And so one thing I found in
Okay.
the research, like I had it all worked out, that if you stacked your 3 types and you stacked your 3 instincts, all you'd have to do is look at the placements. So I would be sexual 8, self-pres 7, and social 4. I thought that's elegant, that'll be easy. But the research came back that the instinct was in charge of the whole thing. And the elegant response is there, but it's secondary. So you have to look at sexual 7, sexual 4, and sexual 9 or 8, whichever you are, and compare it that way.
Okay.
Because it's
Thank you.
a lot more dominant, by the way, not just a little. Okay, now is it Sarah?
I have a context for this question, but I'll leave that to the side. You're welcome to ask, but I'm wondering how a 9 can get in touch with their inner wisdom and develop a sense of sovereignty so that they don't allow all information and insight and input to become influence. So I would like to remain open, but not completely permeable.
Yeah, well, it occurs because your driving instinct is to remain open and to see all points of view. So to declare a view feels dangerous. So you're meant to be open and you're meant to adapt to the situation at hand, just like the 3 and 6, but the center is the action center. So it means not acting unless it's built up to here and something's just non-negotiable, then the 9 will act. But the thing is, it's very hard for the 9 to stay with one decision that could cost them a relationship or harmonious circumstances. So let's say they totally, and you may relate to this, you disagree with someone, then how often you just think to yourself or want to mutter under your breath, yeah, I'm not doing that. Or just think it in your mind, but you just don't say anything, or you just don't do it. And that's the way you assert, is by not doing. And the thing about 9 is yes means maybe, not yes. And maybe means absolutely not. So anytime a 9 says, we'll see, or maybe, or I'll let you know, it's usually not going to happen. Sometimes even okay means, yeah, I didn't actually confirm that. And that's a way to give yourself the options, the possibility, the way to not break rapport and still be in relationship. So even if you are self-pres, you're trying to have your space support your comforts and appetite for self-pres means that it's not just eating for sustenance, it's filling the lovelessness. And do you guys all know what is meant by lovelessness? Because the 9 has a fear of being unlovable. The whole gut triad does. But the bigger fear is that they might not feel love. And it's very disconcerting to a 9 when they've gone numb. And if they've gone numb too long, they don't feel it. And they think, whoa, why don't I feel that kind of love? So do you ever remember in your life as a child or as an adult where there were times when you wondered why you didn't feel something? And was it something you had pushed down and pushed down and pushed down to not be a problem?
I have worked for years, largely on, I mean, just getting in touch with my feeling side in general, and it's largely been introverted feeling work, and I've gotten to where I can do it now, but the place where I'm at now specifically is when I am actively interacting with someone else, is being conscious that I exist, kind of. And not merely that I exist, but that I have my own wants and my own agendas. And how this came up was I had probably the biggest dream I've ever had in my entire life. And I was just so, and like my entire being was on board with this thing. And not only did I know that I want it, which is so unusual, like very, very rare.
Is it an emotional want or a physical want?
It was an emotional want. And it was so strong. And I was in a relationship, and the person that I was talking with was just not showing any sort of interest whatsoever. There was just there was a lack of approval. And I had this experience of self-forgetting, where I just kind of stopped thinking about the dream. And there was a series of events that finally pointed my attention to that. And when I realized what had happened, I was so angry. And it wasn't just that thing. It was like, once I saw it, I was seeing it throughout the entirety of my life, of just erasing myself entirely. And it's frustrating because I think having INTP preferences plays into it, because with FIs being dead last, you're so far out of touch with what you want. So it's like not knowing that to begin with. But how it was just unreal to me to have my whole being in alignment with wanting to do this thing. And suddenly I just kind of forgot about it.
You actually had to forget about it to survive, because the organism is built around wanting this ideal of union. And if it's not there, lovelessness arises, and it's either that person's unlovable, you're unlovable, the situation's unlovable, or you can't feel love. So if you were feeling love and attraction, but it wasn't reciprocated, you would be patient. And the 9 waits. They make themselves available. They take any little cue as a possibility. Even if you're a T, the INTP will imagine how it could be. And it doesn't matter whether you're a 5 or a 9. I mean, the 5 will even do it, even if they have sexual last, but it goes to the fantasy. And then when reality is such that nothing you could do could influence that situation, then you feel betrayed. And it usually goes right back to infancy, where you didn't get the mirroring you needed as a child. The degree of anger for the 9 is based on also what you experienced as an infant, like in the mirroring phase, and the rapprochement, like, was your caregiver attentive to you? did that person look you in the eye and reassure you and track you? Or were you put down and expected to cry yourself to sleep? Now, if you had to cry yourself to sleep, a lot of 9s as infants will literally just cry till they go to sleep. And then that becomes their preferred defense. Other 9s might just keep eating to stay in union with the parent and then not even feel the food they're eating, but wanting that connection so much that they stop feeling the food. And that's why it's called appetite, because the appetite is stronger than the need for sustenance. I mean, we can meet the need for sustenance much faster than we can meet the need for the appetite of what we're longing for. And the 9 is the point of charity on the Enneagram. So if we go faith, hope, and charity, the faith is the 6, the hope is the 3, and the 9 is charity and love, the point of love. The Good Samaritan, if we're going to just use the 9 types, is the 9. A lot of type 9 was put into type 2, and a lot of type 2, the hedonism of 2 was put into 7. But if someone has 2, 7, 8, they're always going to use their hedonistic desires to move them in the world. But the INTP9 has a lot of longing. And the 964 is the most common tritype that has the longing for what's possible, what's ideal, and searches for it everywhere. And it's the type that writes journals more than any other. I think I all shared with you that, like with Don Risa, when I was at his house before he built the barn, but we're visiting, and he said, well, Katherine, do you think I'm more 9-second or 6-second? And he was debating that. And I go, well, what did you remember as a child? And he goes, what age? And I go, well, how about 5 or 6? And then he went and got his journals. But when we look at ourselves as an adult down to child, it's different than what you might write as a child, but still it shows our attention. And do you have a memory, Sarah, of trying to make sense of what you had to do to have someone come towards you? You know, the 9 is going to be available and easy, try to be easy. And the actual 6 is going to say, okay, what do I need to do? Should I do this, do that? And the 4 is waiting for the love to come their way. And so your tritype is, in a way, traumatized in a different way because it doesn't come. And you can't find the formula to make it come. Whereas the 2 goes and does something. They feel they have a false abundance. I have more to share with you. Here, look, I can do this, or you can do that. But if you have 4 as your heart type, you're waiting for it to come your way. And the 9 is reticent, and the 6 is doubtful. So you have the tritype that is the most likely to stand back. And you know, the other type that will do it is the 962, but they'll come forward with what they offer.
Yeah, I relate with a lot of that. In fact, my mom, who is also a 9, I have 2 self-preservation 9 parents. And my brother is a 9, but I think he's an 8 wing, but he's the black sheep of the family. Anyway, when they said when I was about a month old, they said I got spoiled. I wanted to be held all the time. And so they wanted to put a stop to that. So they put me in the crib. I let me cry myself to sleep. And they said I was never a problem again. And it's like, I'm not a problem, I'm a person. And I think what happened in this situation with this individual, I have come to realize over the last few years that the thing that I am seeking, that I'm desperate for, is attunement, because I never had that as a kid.
So even though sexual is 3rd, it's still a part of our stacking. And in but you also have 4. And the way the 4 survives the longing is to endure. The 9 is an enduring type. So we have to think self-pres 9, self-pres 6. Well, I gotta just got to manage my stuff. And the 4 says, for the sake of beauty, I will endure. And if you've imagined a beautiful scenario, it can get the INTP and the INFP waiting a long time for the ideal. But here, let me just say another thing in child development. If we get the union as a newborn, it gives us confidence. If we're a type that wants closeness and we get it, and it sounds like for the first month you did get it, you can't spoil a child with love, but that's what they believed years ago. Even Spock said you should put kids on a regimen where they're fed every 4 hours, not every 2. You know, they changed that, and now you're supposed to feed the baby when they're hungry. But if someone followed that for the kids born in 1946 and on, many children were not picked up when they cried because the belief was you'd be spoiled.
Yeah.
And mothers, I just remember adult women when I was, first in typologies, telling me how it killed them that their child was crying, but they didn't want their child to be spoiled. So they didn't pick the child up.
Yeah, my parents both talked about like it was they said you probably cried for maybe 15 minutes and then you were just completely out. And they're like, and that 15 minutes felt like an eternity, because they wanted to be in connection with me. And I think what happened in this situation, this person, I've never experienced attunement on the level that I did with them. And I think that was so
Exactly.
I was just so desperate for it that I was willing to abandon the thing that I wanted more than almost anything else for it.
That's right. So when the self-pres-social finds a sexual ideal in search of attunement, more than attachment, it's attachment with attunement, and it doesn't work out, it's devastating because you're allowing yourself to go without it. And then when you finally can envision it and you feel it, and there's something unconscious with human beings around that comfort, whatever we want to call it. There's some people we're just immediately more comfortable with and others we aren't. But if there's someone that we meet, and even as a young child, we can have like an attraction to an older person or someone that's not really viable, but we feel that, wow, we either feel seen or it's energetic. And then it's devastating if that person doesn't reciprocate, or if we misinterpret their reciprocation and we think it's that they really care no matter what. Because that's what the sexual instinct wants. They want to know that no matter what, that person will be there for you. And so when we find out it's conditional based on things that don't match our fantasy, it's devastating, especially for people who have sexual third.
I was gonna ask, there has been an aspect of this relationship that I feel like part of what has been an outcome of it is that I'm more conscious of my sexual instinct, and I'm like, oh, this thing, I mean, obviously from what I just said, like I'm willing to just like give up everything. Like I'm almost willing to just blow up my entire life to get that and to have that. And it scares my self-pres instinct. I'm like, I need my stability.
Yeah, and your INTP wouldn't be too sure about it. It might seem like an odd equation, but the visceral energies of the instincts are more dominant. So how about last comment, but I think important, is did you ever feel swept away as a young child or in elementary school by someone that you felt drawn to and hurt, then ultimately hurt because maybe they didn't notice you? Female, male, it doesn't matter, just anyone, a teacher.
I have experienced, I mean, I was interested in the opposite sex from the word go. And I've experienced limerence pretty much throughout my life.
Well, you want to know who's the most comfortable of all, usually with sex and touching and that kind of connection is the self-pres 9. But when you want the emotional attunement with it is where it gets complicated.
Yes. Yes.
And that's why we have to look at our identification and not just the stacking. Like you could have sexual last, but if you were given attunement and mirroring, it just wouldn't matter as much. You would just kind of see the mirroring and say, ah, well, I'd really like it to be more like this. And your INTP would be analyzing it. Oh, maybe if I did this or that, but it wouldn't be like heartbreaking.
Yeah, now that I've experienced that level of attunement, it's before it was like, well, I want that and I want that very much, but I'm not gonna like actually take action to get it. And now it's like, oh, okay, this thing is worth taking action for.
Yeah, and that is what the sexual's doing all the time. We're always risking. It's like if you lead with sexual, you're choosing the energy and the passion and the person, and it's that person, and you don't want to share that person with anybody. It has to be your person, and you will let everything else go. So you are touching into what the sexual is doing every day, all day.
They're terrifying.
Yeah, it's terrible. But we also will go without a relationship because a substitute doesn't necessarily do. You might find it in a friendship or something else, but you'll go without if you want the one. Now, there is a sexual subtype that keeps trying and trying and trying and trying to find the one, but that can happen because somewhere in their childhood they learned that if they just tried harder, they could eventually get some mirroring back. But if you were a child that didn't get that, usually you just wait. You'd rather be alone than be with someone who's not the one. Seems counter.
Better to be alone with the wrong person.
Yeah, yeah. I'd appreciate it if you'd read what I wrote about the 469 tritype and just tell me how you do or don't relate to it.
Okay.
Because you're so misunderstood as a tritype, and in this case, also your Myers-Briggs. It's very meaningful. And I think if more people understood what it's like to be your tritype, they'd recognize themselves. Because especially the 964 and the 694 are the most inclined to mistype as the 5 rather than the 6.
Yeah.
And it's huge once they understand that that's really what it is. Yeah, thank you. Anything that you say, I'll share with others. Okay, thanks. Okay, who's next? Marcus?
Okay, so actually I kind of want to involve Damien in this conversation too. Because like I read his book and I really like the instinctual like variant subtypes in it and how a person can, for example, be introverted but like appear extroverted in social situations,
I
but it's
totally,
only for a certain amount of time.
right. And what I don't think, Damien, you had read my analysis, the way the types shift, like the sexual has to go into the social world to find a new mate.
Right.
And the self-pres has to spruce up to attract a mate. And the social goes after a self-pres person that can financially ensure their status. But it's just the movement. And so I totally agree with Damien on that. Would you like to say something, Damien, about that? Because he's referencing your book.
I mean, I kind of wonder maybe what the connections would be to where, like with the sexual social, because you talk about, for example, how the sexual instinct, which makes sense to me, would necessarily have to, you kind of enter the social arena if they're going to find a mate. They can't just do it sitting at home all day.
Right.
But
Well,
with the sexual social, do that more than the sexual self-pres, perhaps. Or would the sexual self-pres still do that, but be a little more try to draw the other in,
yeah.
I guess, even though they're still
Sexual,
doing it.
yeah, they're trying to lure the person in.
So,
They have an introverted heart type, which would be 4, or if they're an introverted person, they're really trying to use a fishing lure that's sparkly,
Right.
which is why they're the most inclined to accessorize or do something to have a twinkly quality in their personality and their word choices, their dress. You have to look desirable
Right. Right.
one way or another. But
What's your Damien's book? 'Cause I know you've read his book too. So like when you look through the pages from like 130, like I don't know, like all the different types, like subtypes of the instinctual variants. I'm interested in what your subtype for the instinctual
well,
variant.
yeah, I wanted to talk to Damien about that
Okay.
and see what he saw, because it's his creation and he might see things that I don't.
So, Marcus, you're asking about the stack shift, right? Like within sexual
Yes.
self-pres, am I seeing her as like the high self-pres, low self-pres, or middle self-pres? I mean, I
Yes.
would probably, I mean, from what I've seen, I would agree that probably higher self-pres within that range.
Yeah.
That would make sense to me. I
What do you
mean,
mean?
but again, I mean, I've only talked to you a few times, but
All
yeah,
within arm's length. Oh,
right.
you need a stapler, you need a note, you need
Yeah, I got my water right here. So,
got everything. Yeah. And they're very close. And I
right.
found it, let me know if you found this. And that's when the stacking pattern came out, which was at the same time as all my research. I just had to keep researching to see the validity of it. But if in this stacking, if someone had the stair step, they were just oscillating through in a kind of easy rhythm. And then it's hard for them to know which is in the lead. But the person with the strong, like one instinct tall and the other two low, they don't see the lower ones. And all we see is the dominant one.
Yeah.
But when two are close, like mine are very close, sexual wins, but they're both high. What's more noteworthy is my social's so low. But
So,
I'm positively identified, so it doesn't upset me.
and I don't want to like monopolize the rest of the time, but just like a quick question. I mean, I know that, we're basically on the same page here, but as far as, how we're going to formulate things, and you're talking about, you have the stack, order of your instincts, and you have like your sexual at the top, and your self-pres is close, and your social is down here at the bottom.
Yeah.
So, would you agree that that would be a stack shift from sexual self-pres to self-pres social?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that point because I kind of feel like that if you're going because that's how you're bringing in the social into the whole equation.
That's right. I totally,
Right.
that's
So,
what I found. And then I stopped there because it just repeats. You just go through all the permutations again.
right,
Yeah.
right.
You're both mystics in Damien's book, sexual self-pres to as like SPS, a little mystic.
And
Okay, that
we're both leading with a gut type, so we're feeling it on a visceral level too, and that does make a difference.
okay.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're both beautiful people. And someone else could ask a question.
Oh, thank you, Marcus. Okay, Elena?
So just going back to what was discussed, what you were saying, Sarah, in the context of 9. So I thought I'd just kind of make some observations because my husband's a self-pro-social 9-wing 1, and I've known a lot of 9s. So in connection with the attunement, what you're describing here, I mean, I see that as a sense of a 9 seeking to connect with the other who creates some space for them, right? That they can show up. In a romantic relationship, irrespective of the stack, the 9 is going to try to merge. The 9 has this ideal partner in their heads, right? In any event. So I think for a 9, because they have so much merging going on and this idealized, relationship or person in their minds, that's what they're drawn for no matter what. Like, so the sexual lust doesn't even come into me for a 9 because 9s are doing something that looks very, very similar. So I'm very sensitive with 9s because I think 9s have it hard because of the this aspect of needing space and needing to be seen, but they don't want to push themselves out. And in a romantic setting, when somebody may think, oh, the space is here, and they're there and they get shut down, that's very painful.
Yes.
So it's kind of like that's what I've seen. And I don't want to get into specifics of my relationship with my partner, but I'm saying when a 9 pushes themselves out and feels like they're accepted and they are understood and they are somebody else sees them and they are comfortable in their own skin before this other person, and then that person withdraws, whatever, that attunement, when that is pulled like that is very destabilizing for a 9.
Yes. Well, here's something
Yeah.
important that 9s have reported, and that is pretty young in life, they form their ideal person they want to be with. It doesn't matter the stacking. And then when they find the person that matches their ideal, they make themselves available and kind of stand back or offer something or gently move in and do something that makes it easier, or they just smile. Like if they're really shy, they just might smile at you, and that's an invitation. So the ones that are tentative are more inclined to do that. The self-pres 9 is a little stronger presentation, and they will assert by willing to pursue. So even though they're afraid of not having the merge, what they've shared is they want people to merge with them. But if people don't, and it's an object of their desire, the way Sarah shared, then they're going to try, and they don't just give up. In fact, they might unconsciously think they can wait out the person until the time is right. So more than any other type, they can endure and hope. And then if the sexual is last, they'll show their social abilities as an attribute. So what they can provide is an attribute. Their easygoing, welcoming nature is an attribute. And then when the sexual comes online, then they can spruce up and be more twinkly in their conversation and their appearance. But if they're self-pres, you might be their thing. And did your husband know immediately that you were the one?
So with us, he was kind of the forward one. And
Yeah.
he was the one that proposed marriage. And I was just like, I don't even know what is going on. We've been married like 20 years. And I say to him, down from that pedestal. I don't want to be up there on this pedestal that you put me on. I'm not like up there. But that's what they do. Like irrespective of the sexual instinct. Because I
That's
think they have the, okay, you're it for me. And that is it. Like,
That's it. Yeah. And what's interesting is if they were sexual 9, they would be a little more sassy about wanting you to merge with them and display that more. But the self-pres, basically, you're their survival strategy. If you're taken care of, they're taken care of. And they naturally are quite good at it. But with the sexual 9, you have this total union fusion. But they can imagine that union fusion with a lot of people, because anyone they get close to will trigger union. And it's the difference between 5 and 9. It's the sexual 5 that will feel that, but it'll be for the few. It'll be for this ideal that is uncontaminated. And they just come online and they don't seem like 5s, but they have a lot of longing, but they think they'll contaminate the relationship. So they can love from afar or in intense moments, but day in and day out, it's overwhelming to them because they're still 5s. Okay. If you're neglected, usually you become distant. So the attachment is interrupted. And if you had to make it on your own, then you might, depending on the type, and with gut types, it's pretty strong, that for the most part, you won't expect. You may want it You may try to get it younger, but if you're neglected, especially for gut type, you don't know the formula for getting the good feelings, and you don't even know who to quite blame if you don't get them. Whereas if you're a heart type, you try to do things. And so then it's like love, hate, like, okay, what causes love? What causes hate? And the fears of being ignored, not just neglected, because they deliberately stated what they wanted and went into an action. And if that's neglected, then they feel like they don't have what it takes to feel secure. And they usually have an insecure attachment. And they keep trying, like, what's the formula? What's the formula for getting the good feeling and the closeness? The amazing thing about babies is that they're actually from birth trying to be attuned to the mother, not just the mother or caregiver with them, but they're tracking the mother and then trying to get their attention. I remember one time when I was at the grocery store and I had my infant son with me, and he was about 3 months old. And I kind of just felt his energy and I thought he was asleep. But then I looked over to make sure he was okay. And he was just like, but his energy had been trying to get me to look at him. But I was fixed on getting canned food or whatever. So the infant from very, very young age is trying to get the attention of their caregiver. And some, if they're really extroverted, might do it with other people. But even at the like 10 months when there's kind of a fear of strangers, the sexual of any type will not want anyone to touch their caregiver. They'll be quite territorial. So if someone comes up and goes, hey, Katherine, how are you? Because I'm holding my child, the sexual gut type didn't take the fingers off. They're like, don't touch her. And it's just primal. But if it's a head type, they're trying to ascertain, is this safe or unsafe? And I'm not getting the attention, they might cry rather than take the fingers off, like that fussy feeling that infants have. But as adults, and it depends on our personality type, and for sure our gut type or heart type or head type. Because the head type's going to overthink what they need to learn or know, even as a little baby, to get the security. And the head types are most focused on kind of mental ideas of security. And the gut type wants comfort. And how do they need to be comfortable and get comforting care? And they try to become invisible, like not exist. Like, to be loved, you must not be a problem. You have to be a model child. And of course, the 1 tries to be that. The 8 can't be that. So they kind of just accept that they aren't. And the 9 just is very pleasant. And that's how they'll be the model child. But the 9 is denied the union that they want. So, of course, it can always happen a little amount. But if the child is a head type, growing up with neglect, they try to figure out the formula, not of love and hate, but what they need to know or learn to get it, or at the very least, not feel in danger not getting it. And sometimes they'll go to a substitute person. They'll calculate. I've even seen young head types that were neglected go in search of a new caregiver. Like, they could be at a party and say, will you be my mom? And they're looking for that thing we all need or want. Whereas a really shy person, an introvert, will just try to be available more. But the child who's not getting it might just go up to someone who acts motherly in the way that they want and ask them if they'll be their mom. And then they get in trouble usually, because then their mom feels embarrassed if the mom wasn't able to give it. But yeah, if you study children and age appropriateness, you can see a lot of extraordinary things. And then that's how we can begin to unravel kind of attitudes that we have that are ingrained based on how our tritype and our instinctual stackings interpreted the lack of attunement and then what we did with that lack. So personally, I just figured it wasn't coming from my mother. I stopped looking, but I did get it from my nanny. So that gave me the security. But then I would always kind of assess who I could just, like at the beach, go sit on their towel and get my little grimy hands as a toddler all over sand all over their towel. But I would know who would accept me and who wouldn't.
Catherine, can I ask you a question? Like in like the book, The Wisdom of the Enneagram, in regards to growing up as a child and your relation to parents, does that affect what type you are?
Well, yeah, so you'll notice that Don talked about the 4 with, feeling like lack of attunement with both parents. But I'll tell you what's more significant is that the 4 still interjects the positive and the negative of both parents. And so they're sometimes fighting with themselves over issues because even if they don't want to be like their parent, they've swallowed them whole. And so each type does that. And so it's just a different facet of this wonderful combination of variables coming together.
Okay, wait, but not just the 4. What about you when you were growing up and how you had your relationship with your parents, and did it affect your type?
Yeah. Well, from the standpoint that I would, in a way, just keep going for what I wanted. And if I didn't get it, I'd get it someplace else.
No, but like your mother, like your relationship, okay, 4s and 5s have like a disassociation to like a certain degree with like both parents. But your type 8, what is it? What is your relation? Because there's some types that have a relation or a connection to either the mother or the father
It's the mother.
more closely.
So the 8 feels they must take care of the mother for the mother to take care of them.
Okay.
And like the 6 needs the guidance from the father, or they don't feel safe. Yes, all that's actually very true. It's another factor.
So I earlier heard you say that we're born with our instincts stack, and that's different than what I'd heard another teacher say, that it's learned in the family. And I could say that that would make sense for me, learned in the family. So I was just wanting to dial that down a little bit.
Well, they're both true. So what happens is we're born with that lens of perception of what matters to us. And originally they thought the Enneagram types were learned in the family system. But then when brain science evolved, it became very clear that we're born with it, but our identifications, like when they did all the twin studies, they took these identical twins that were given up for adoption or triplets and put them in different family scenarios to see what was biological and what was environmental. And then they found it was almost 50-50. So twins might like a lot of the same things, but based on their family situation and their caregiving or lack thereof, form their attitudes around their characteristics. So with the Enneagram, what I found is that we're born with our type and we're born with our stacking. But the reason I stress that we must look at the stacking order of our instincts and our types, and then we need to look at the percentages we have for each type. So I have very high percentage of sexual and self-pres and a lower percentage or input from my social. So it means I can socially be blind. I said blind originally, and then a year and a half later, I said, no, because once we learn about it, we see it. So it's not totally blind, it's kind of immature. But so then the last thing after order proportion is identification. What did your family system do with your type? I was the only one in my family and extended family that was sexual. Find the mirroring. My mother had sexual last, so it was like, why do you want to know that? Or why does that matter? Oh, yeah, don't touch me. But she didn't like anybody to touch her. But I wanted the closeness as a sexual. Physically, then I wanted it intellectually, emotionally.
Yeah, we have the same stacking, and my sexual attraction is close to the self-pres. Maybe for the sequel, as Sarah suggested. I thought I was a 964. My dad was a 4. He's been gone for a couple of years, and my boyfriend of 6 years is a 2. And now I feel very 962.
Well, here's the wonderful thing about our beloved 9s is they take on the form and shape of the person they're most attached to. And on another piece that's very important, and Tom Condon introduced, and research kind of agreed with it, so it's possible, is that we have the imprinting of our parents.
Mm-hmm.
So in my case, as the 874, my father was an 8, my mother was a 4. So where'd the 7 come from? But anyhow, that we could say I interjected those. But my brothers didn't. They don't have the 7, and only one brother has the 4. So it has to be biological, even if we have siblings, even if we're twins, we have a different relationship to each person in our family. And why? Because there's a dynamic created with my set of types and your set of types, Krista. And then we have our childhood experiences of what we're looking for and our stackings of both our tritypes and our instincts. And when that matches with interest, we feel that ding, oh yeah, there's excitement. But if we get the feeling when we meet someone that we don't like it, it's usually because there's something about them on an unconscious level that reminds us of not good. A lot of times 6s will say if people don't smile. So when I first made my first set of cards, I found a very happy 2 face, that was smiling. It was just a head with a face. I don't know if any of you saw my first set, but I used to have that online. And then the 6s would choose that card because, of course, the 6 won't choose the 6 card. And I'd say, well, why did you choose this card? And I wouldn't just ask about the face. And they go, oh, well, I like to see a friendly face. And that's when I first learned how important that was to the 6. And then I went in pursuit of trying to understand how everybody, what you want to see. Well, a friendly face is nice, of course. Biologically, we're going to be attracted to it. But if it's too friendly, I'm like, if you want to play, sure. But if you're like attentively friendly too much, I want to know what you want from me. And that could be 2 things. That could be gut type. That could be sexual if I don't feel the twinship. Or, very important, it could be that I didn't get that attunement from my mother. But I did get it from my nanny for 7 years. She lived with us. But she was, a 953. She was invisible. Self-pres.
Catherine, my dad is a 1 and my mom is a 2. I'm probably a 5 and I go to like 1 and 2. I don't know.
Yeah, but see, yeah, they're not in your tritype. And the difference between the 469 and the 479 is huge because, again, as I talked about earlier, the 479, you're receptive, and the 469 is much deeper. So the archetype of the deepest person is actually 469, not 479, not 459, not any other combination. So when we talk about person who has the most depth is 469 for what it's worth.
Catherine, do you mind? Sorry, can you clarify what that means? The person that has most depth? Sorry, just me. I'm just jumping in quickly.
So when the archetypes became very visual, and I kept interviewing, and every study I did, I asked people what tritype they are, what type, what instinct, did they have a parent with that tritype or not, or type or instinct. And then I ask them how confident they are. And I deliberately put in a comment section. So if they check off, I'm absolutely certain, but then they fill in the comments. Well, this person thinks I'm that, and that person thinks I'm this. And so I'm not sure, but they just checked off that they were absolutely certain. And then I know that they have 6 or 9 in the tritype. And then I look at the rest of what they answer. So I can sort out people with certainty, because that's the first thing people ask me is, how do you know you're working with the right types? Well, from the very beginning, I was making certain I knew. And then compared and contrast every questionnaire, and you're all free to use that questionnaire. It's very powerful. And I used it in every field, and people just reveal themselves, or at least part of themselves. But more specifically, the 479 doesn't want to go deep. Even if they have 4, they want to keep it light and on the surface. Whereas 469, 4 and 6 have angst. They have existential fears. They want to understand. And so they go deeper trying to make sense of their circumstances. Where the 7s in that tritype try to deny that 4's need for depth. They might search for it separately, but it's hard for them to stay attuned on a deep level because they're trying to avoid being rejected. And so the 7 is trying to be cool and not a problem. And the minute the 479 shows negativity, they're not as appreciated. People say, well, I thought you were more spiritual. They get, because in the beginning, they're really trying to be an ideal. And then if they show their own disappointment, then, wait, I thought you were positive. And so then they learn very young to not show it. Whereas the 6 can't avoid it. They are going to ask for support. They're going to show it in their expressions. They're going to display concern, which does what? It brings people towards them. Are you okay? Whereas the 479 is, you have to look closely because they're concealing it. It's lighter. It's not going as deep. So the most emotionally introspective tritype is the 469, and yet it's the least accurately typed. Everyone avoids it, but it's actually very common, especially in typology. But that's because, remember what I said? The archetypes of 6 were lost. The intuitive 6, lost. The sexual 6, lost. Everything was built around the self-pres social 6. So a whole category was missed.
Catherine, counterphobic and phobic 6, like this is like an interesting thing. I don't know why, and they're almost like different types.
They're not really. And I'll tell you why, because underneath that, just like with the tritypes, it's still the same passion, fixation, and conviction. But the phobic goes, whoa, whoa, and they try to avoid it. And the sexual, because of the higher velocity, and both are feeling adrenaline, but the adrenaline gets the phobic 6 to pull away. But it'll be their tritypes that's determining if they're phobic or counterphobic. But the counterphobic 6 will have 8 in their tritype or 1 with another strong type. And they can't stand the adrenaline, so they go into it to get it over with. But they're still triggered by the same thing. And that's the same, and that's why I came up with countertypes, because the stacking of the 3 instincts reveal the atypical combinations. So that's why there was one type that's the stereotype, matches the early description of the types. And one seems like, wow, that can't be, a type. But it's just the core fear of the type with the core fear of the instinct produces this odd thing, like at the beginning. Like a lot of times people don't realize that I'm an 8. And we also have visual examples. And if all of us go back to when we're about 5 and the onset of puberty, and then when we're into puberty, we'll see clearly the archetype of the face. And it's huge. Like the 8 in repose looks angry. And so it's very different than a 3 in repose, because even in repose, the 3 will have a little mouth that sort of turns up, or the 7, whereas the 8 has a straight mouth or the down mouth. And you can only really see it when someone doesn't know their picture's being taken.
Going back to what you had said about 4s, introjecting both parents, both the good and the bad.
Not just both parents, everyone in their life.
Yeah, well,
Love,
everyone.
hate. You have love.
The more people they have, the more introjection. The less people, the less introjection. So
But
then
the
you've
stronger
also,
the introjection, the
you've
fewer,
also
the more intense the interjections.
You've also got the positive and negative affiliations with your tri-type. And I was kind of thinking about, like, for me, I had a very small network, small family unit, very small, interjecting my caregivers into my tri-type. If I had negative affiliations with that because they were in conflict with it, like each one was fighting the other, one was a 7 and one was a 1.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's identifications.
kind of wanting to see this kind of tangle, and right away you're like lighting up at the yeah, I'm identifying something. If you could kind of untangle that for me.
Well, here's the important thing is someone could be negatively identified with all of them. And as I just said, if you have fewer people, the stronger the introjection, the more alive both facets of that person are. But the thing is, there was TV. Even if you didn't engage with other children, you observed them. Even if you were homeschooled, you had the impression from the person teaching you. And if it was your parent, okay, then that gets more and more focused. But didn't you go to school?
Yeah, I went to school.
So you were interjecting anyone you focused on in school. And if you liked something about them, but you were envious, you still interjected it and feel like you want it and angry you don't have it. But yeah, consider that you are experientially negatively identified with all 3. But see if you're negatively identified with all 3 types in your tri-type, and I don't think you are. I think you're positively identified with the 4.
I think I am too. I think I am positively identified with 4ness, which has a negative quality to it. So there's like positive to the negative. And
Yeah, but you take it in. You like
identify.
that. You like those extremes.
Yeah.
And that's noteworthy. Okay, so who did I leave off with? Giancarlo?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
really quick, since you mentioned 4 and 7 avoiding the depth of 4 6, so between 471, 479, and 478, can you rank them? Which one will avoid talking about negative or dark emotions the most, and which one the least?
479. They're
And then
little, yeah, they try to, even if I mistakenly in some people's minds when I was teaching it on all 4s, because David was really articulate about the 4 experience as a 468 and as a sexual social 468. And we would have these weekend workshops and study groups with the 4s. And there was like the 4 who showed the persona of happiness and a lighter quality. And how did they do that? Especially if they were social 4. They would be engaging, and it's the 4 that comes forward a little more, and they can seem kind of 2-ish. So I just said, yeah, it's kind of the 4s, they're the happy 4. But they're still longing for everything that the other 4s are longing for, but they're willing to sacrifice for the sake of fitting in. And so they're social 4s, 7, 9, so that 9 can't show you, they minimize their negative emotions. They minimize all their emotions. They try to keep them in that zone of kind of mid-level. And the 7 gets bored and doesn't function well if they're in their negativity. And so what happens is the 7 and 9 that need things positive will, in a way, win over the 4's need to go into the negative emotion. Now, I'm not saying they don't go into negative emotion, but what I am saying is they do it privately. They don't display it outwardly.
Oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, and if there's a 4-7-1 with a strong 9 wing, it will be stronger than with a 2 wing. Like 1 wing 2 will be more.
Well, they always have both, right? Yeah, but 4-7-1 has an interesting dichotomy because what happens is they all connect to 1. So the 4 has a line to 1, the 7 has a line to 1, and the 1 is a line to 4 and a line to 7. So it becomes this uber idealistic person that is angry if things aren't ideal, if they lead with 1, because they're just repeated, because they're all connected. Just like the 3-6-9, they may adapt and adjust, but it's very hard for them to have their individuality because they're always adjusting. So holding on to their individuality is tough. But if they have 2 types that are like the 6 and 9 with 4, they'll think they're a 4 because that gives them identity. And it names something important. Yeah, the 1-4-7, like I've even had 1-4-7s that were social, that when I ask them, give me an example of what happens when an ideal concept that you want to contribute as a social is not enacted. Well, the 1 wants things to improve. They need improvement to feel alive, to give meaning and purpose to their lives. So they'll give some example like this, where they join a group, being social, to make a difference, to improve circumstances. But then in the group, people are not carrying their weight, or it doesn't go anywhere. It's more of just a social group. Nothing's improved. And they feel angry and resentful because they joined the group to improve something. And so the idealism becomes like a fixed kind of gut type granite perspective. And then they don't know what to do. Do they still have the issue that they want to see improved, and they're still willing to donate their time, and they still need to be accepted by a group, but it's no longer going in the way of their ideal, their vision, because the 1 wants to see it manifest as improvement. The 4, it needs to be ideal as well. That's why it's triple ideal. And the 7 has the ideal vision. So when it doesn't happen, they're very, very frustrated and grumbly, is the way they report it. And they are. Well, any of us can be grumbly, but the way the 1-4-7 is when the ideal isn't manifested. So they try very hard to improve, and they try to figure out what'll get other people to want to move towards improvement. And then they're kind of heartbroken because it's not happening. And then they think there's something wrong with them, and they need to improve something within themselves to find the right group that will follow through with seeking improvement. But they can't stop. If they can't improve others, they try to improve themselves to be able to improve others. And then what was the other question? And
Oh, no, yeah, I was just trying to type like some person in my life who he's either a 9-wing 1 or a 1-wing 9. I can't decide. Definitely
Oh.
got type with 7 and 4.
Well, the
And
9 won't complain as much. They'll just not do. The 1 will actually say, you didn't keep your word, you didn't do this, and they desperately need to see improvement. And they think they're being helpful and that it'll like get others to do it, but they can come across critical. Now, the most critical is the 1-4-6. So they suffer the most with feeling misunderstood and misunderstanding others. Yeah. What do those types share in common, and how are they opposite? So what does 1, 4, and 7 share in common? A need for the ideal. So when they come together, boy, that ideal is giant. And it's easy for it not to manifest one way or another. And so they have frustration over not seeing it manifested. So it's triple frustration. And yet they're willing to work hard to make something manifest because of the 1, and they're able to see the nuances of how it could reach that ideal standard because of 4. And the 7 has the long range vision. So what's possible is extraordinary. That's why we need all tritypes. Okay.
Yeah. No, I think I think it's actually 1. Just that 9 wing kind of makes the anger more cold or silent treatment as opposed to like with a 2. There is more of like, hey, I told you that. No, there's none of that.
It'll be more indifference or
Yeah.
just doing it. Go like if you say, well, will you do that? And they'll say, okay. And then they don't do it. And then
Yeah.
you're the problem for complaining about it. It's that we all have defense strategies and they all work one way or another to some degree. And we need them all. We need every single combination. I mean, just in the beginning of the test, by ranking the 3 cards for each type, and then we look at your choices, and each time you had a choice point, you're given that choice point again with 2 sets of cards, your first choice and your second choice. But even though I didn't include your 3rd choice card in the test, it's still the anchor. And why was it 3rd? And it's very meaningful because maybe 2 were really close, or maybe it was also close. But still, the testing is with the first 2. If I did a 3rd set of testing with the cards, we don't do as well. We're bored. We're not going to pay attention. And that's why I intersperse it with the written word and did that with the subtypes too. And then it's all the patterns and then how they come together. And so they found this genius programmer during COVID that could do all these things. And I go, okay, this is what I saw in person. This type does this, and that type does that, and that instinct does this. And he put them all in. And in the beginning, I thought, well, it'll just notify them if they need to go deeper, or that it's usually the 6 or the 9. I was going to do all 9 types, but the other types have clear patterns. And so do the 6 and 9, but they just don't like that the patterns reveal what they're doing. Because people can, when I was still doing the beta testing, I said, if there's any problems, let me know. And I did it for 3.5 years. And the people would say, hey, Katherine, you do have a glitch. I didn't choose 1 6 card deliberately. And it still said I was a 6. And I go, are you a 6? Well, yeah, but I just wanted to test the test. And I said, well, it's picking up your patterns. So even though you didn't have a single card, it tracks when you make a choice and if it's the same choice another time, or like if you have 5 and 7, it's kind of pointing to 6. You have to make sure it's not 6. If you choose 8 and 1, it's pointing to 9. And it's mapping all the things I saw in person with people and with thousands of people, because I worked in organizations all the time and with groups as well as my regular clientele. So I had both the research interviews of 3 hours and working with people. And so I knew what happened. Some people, when I put the cards out, they would see that I then picked them up and put them to the side. So then they'd do it and put it to the side. Other people just wait. And they would have seen other people pick them up, and I just studied everything. And then you just have to see if it's true or not true, or how much it might be true. And then you explore further to check it. So all I can share is what I have found, and I could change my mind, if all of a sudden a new piece came in and everything kind of clarified in a new way. And that's why in the beginning, when I first did the formal research, I said, okay, this is what I know now. But please be open because I'm going to add more and more and more. And so some people that really like Tritype never saw what I added, but I just kept doing studies and then it got more and more and more specific. So if they didn't know those steps, which most people didn't, with the synergy of the 3 types, and I do explain it on my website. I did insert that for now as kind of an excerpt from my upcoming book, but I keep changing what's on my website. So you might want to go look at that now because I added extra pages and the 20 steps. Now they move very quickly, so you have to find them in motion. But I'm trying to find the magic way to say it, that it isn't just these 3 types we relate to. You must have the merge, and numerically, underneath it, or are you a 1? Like you could be a 9 in the gut center, but your numerical value, like with the 379, becomes 1. So the 379 is very 1-ish, but they're initiators, but they don't like closure. Whereas if you have 1 in the tritype, you must have closure. You must improve. That's what your gut's telling you need to do. So those are the things I've learned along the way. And I'm happy to share those. I'm the only one that actually studied and went to intensives with each of the schools and with Ichazo and Naranjo and did 24 research studies. So I feel like I need to just share that. And then you guys can decide how true or not true it is. But at least if you have the right information, you can check it out. So I will do this again if people want me to, because I've got so much in here, you have no idea. And I respect all of you wanting to make your own contributions and to understand this system at the same level that I did and do. I've never gotten bored in 40 years. Can you imagine never being bored with the system for 40 years?
Yeah, share everything you want to share. You have a beautiful brain.
Yeah.
Thanks, Catherine.
Bye, y'all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.